Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. You ever notice how the tone has shifted? I mean, isn't it funny? A couple decades ago, the Democrats across the board were sounding the alarm about China, right? Even though they're the ones who allowed China into the WTO. But you know, the Democrats used to actually advocate for the working class. At one point, Democrats used to talk about unfair trade and manufacturing jobs being shipped overseas. But now all of a sudden, as Trump is finally doing something about it, now that he's laying down tariffs and defending the American worker, all of a sudden it's a 5-alarm fire and the end of the world as we know it? The stock market, I think, has tanked 10%. By the way, a far cry from what we saw during the Biden administration in the early days, where markets were down nearly 30. We're seeing some fluctuations, a little bit of volatility, of course, which is not exactly surprising. And the Democrats are running around with their frickin' hair on fire. Well, I'll tell you, one thing's absolutely clear. The Democrat Party has become the party of Wall Street, and they're once again being exposed as massive hypocrites here. And of course, you could guess exactly what's happening once again, as they're all throwing a damn tantrum, essentially trying to label Donald Trump as some sort of economic terrorist. Clips are now resurfacing and bouncing all over the internet showing Democrats essentially advocating for exactly what Trump is currently doing. Let me show you guys exactly what's going on. Let's expose this massive Democrat hypocrisy. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright folks, so it's basically exactly like I said it in the intro, pure Democrat hypocrisy, just like on the border and so many different issues. They're currently throwing a tantrum, but not so long ago, at one point, they sang a completely different tune.
The average U.S. MFN tariff on Chinese goods coming into the United States is 2%, whereas the average Chinese MFN tariff on U.S. goods going into China is 35%. Is that reciprocal? Now, if you take a country the size of China with the very cheap, and in some instances, slave labor, the lack of market access, the rip-off of our intellectual property, the transfer of technology, a country that is not willing to play by the rules in any respect in this trade relationship, you have a serious threat not only to our relationship, but to the industrialized world.
But what I refuse to accept is that we have to sign trade deals like the South Korea agreement that are bad for American workers. What I oppose and what I will always oppose are trade deals that put the interests of Wall Street ahead of the interests of American workers. That's why it didn't make sense to normalize trade relations with China without asking more from China. When I say that whenever trade deals we negotiate come to my desk, they are going to be good for American workers.
One of the reasons for that collapse of the middle class is the hemorrhaging of decent-paying manufacturing jobs. The time is long overdue for them to start building plants in this country to produce those products and hire the millions of American workers who are capable of doing that work.
Not only did I vote against all of these trade agreements, NAFTA, PNTR with China, and all of those, I was on the picket lines in early 1990s with the unions. We understood what was going on, please. Right. And Secretary Clinton, on the other hand, supported virtually all of these trade agreements, which have turned out to be an unmitigated disaster for working class people in this country.
Yeah, of course, that was the Democrats before the working class ditched them. Back when they used to actually have to pander to working class voters, that used to be the rhetoric. It's funny how things switched up, huh? Or I guess in a way, we're finally seeing their true colors. The liberal elites are losing their minds, not because these policies are guaranteed to hurt the American worker, not because they're worried about you. No, because they're worried about their stock portfolios. That's the truth. They're worried about their cozy backroom deals, their Beijing business partners, and their globalist multinational buddies losing access to cheap labor and zero tariff loopholes. That's what's really going on here. I'm going to state it once again unequivocally, and this is, by the way, again, something Democrats used to say all the time. The stock market isn't the economy. Wall Street isn't Main Street. And yeah, sure, I'm invested in the markets. I get it. Probably most of you guys are as well. But let's be real. Markets go up, markets go down. And sure, we're seeing some fluctuation, we're seeing some volatility, but let's be totally real. A couple days of turbulence is not a crisis. And of course, as we know in investing, you don't panic over the short term. You gotta have a long-term view, and that's the entire point here. And the outlook here, very simply, is it's time for the average American worker to get a win. Because guess what? They haven't gotten a win in decades. The system has been totally rigged against them. Working class towns have been gutted, jobs outsourced, their wages suppressed. And frankly, it's not just Democrats, but both parties have watched it happen. They've allowed it to happen. And the only people who are really benefiting are those who are flying to Davos, those who are shipping your future and your interests to Shanghai. And very simply, Donald Trump is saying no more. He's saying America is no longer for sale. If you want to access American markets, if you want to sell your goods to American consumers, then you better play by the rules. And this is especially important right now as we enter the next phase of global economics. Right now, we're going through a full-blown AI industrial revolution. And if you think the first industrial revolution was disruptive, just wait until artificial intelligence starts replacing every desk job in the country. The reality is the stakes are higher now than they've ever been. And if America is going to survive this shift, it needs to rebuild strength in its supply chains, in energy and technology, and yes, in factories and manufacturing. You know, at the end of the day, there's two priorities for Donald Trump, at least the way I see it. Defending American workers, defending the American middle class, and national resilience, putting America in the strongest position possible to navigate the radical shift that's likely to come. And you know, just like I said earlier, the Democrats are trying to paint Donald Trump as some sort of economic terrorist, like he's just trying to burn the whole thing down. But it should be obvious to anybody who's paying attention that the president is fighting for your interests. And most importantly, the working class interests, you know, something the Democrats used to pretend they cared about. Such utter freaking hypocrisy. And it's funny because, you know, the left is always going on, talking about how the parties shift, right? Yeah, okay, sure, Republicans freed the slaves. Democrats were the party of the KKK and the Dixiecrats, but then the parties flipped, right? Well, it's funny how they use that narrative when they believe it suits them. But speaking of the parties actually flipping, let me tell you, the parties have absolutely flipped, and very recently, just not in the way that the Democrats claim. The Democrat Party is no longer the party of the working class, not even close. They're the party of the university elites, the tech monopolies, the Hollywood elite, the Wall Street hedge funds. They're the party of the LinkedIn desk jockeys and connected bureaucrats, and clearly no longer the party of the steelworker or the farmers or the truckers. One thing is absolutely obvious, and especially now, more than ever, they have turned their back on the American worker.
We haven't heard much about the talks between President Trump and President Xi of China, but I hope he was tough with them. Tough with them on North Korea, because if China would cut off trade with North Korea, that would curb North Korea better than anything else. And tough on China on trade. I tend to more agree with President Trump than I did with President Obama on Bush on trade. The whole idea for China manipulating their currency, I learned about them when I visited with Macney. I visited Crucible Steel here in Syracuse, and they were telling me back then how their steel products had an unfair advantage because China was manipulating its currency. That's how the whole issue came to the fore, because I happened to visit Crucible Steel back in 2004 or 5, sometime like that. So I hope he's really tough on China.
And I think left-wing commentator Batia Ungar-Sargon laid it out quite clearly on Piers Morgan's show the other day.
What I find so frustrating about the conversation around tariffs is that we all agree on the problem. We all agree that the deindustrialization of America led to the downward mobility of the American working class, deaths of despair, people working multiple jobs and not being able to afford the American dream. We all agree that it is deeply unfair for the American middle class to be bearing the burden of unfair tariffs from other countries. We all agree that it is great for the president to have leverage in order to demand reasonable things, like that countries stop allowing fentanyl to murder 100,000 Americans every year, and that Mexico do its part to police its own border. And yet when somebody has the courage to show up and say to Wall Street, screw you, I'm waging class warfare on behalf of the American working class, and you elites in Wall Street, you do what you need to do because I'm not going to stop fighting for the American working class. Suddenly, everybody is sitting around going, oh no, the stock market. Yeah, the stock market looks like that because the rich are punishing Trump for siding with the neglected and humiliated American working class over them. We have already seen $1.2 trillion in manufacturing invested in this country since January 21st. Now, how long is Wall Street going to keep trying to punish this president for standing the American working class? I don't know, but I can tell you that the view from the street is people cannot believe that there is a president who is working for them, who is putting them first and telling Wall Street to go screw itself. Wall Street, which picked the Democrats for the last 3 election cycles in a row.
good one to counter China's influence. Would you keep the tariffs?
No. Hey, look, who said Trump's idea is a good one?
That was President Biden in 2020, suggesting he was open to turning away from Trump-era tariff policies. But Tuesday, nearly 4 years later, his administration announced it would keep some of those tariffs and add more. There will soon be a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, taxes of 50% on Chinese solar cells, semiconductors, and some medical products, and a 25% tariff on some steel and aluminum products. The Biden administration says these fines will punish China for harmful trade practices and protect American investments in green energy and manufacturing.